Where can we start with this? Why do tribes matter for men? You know, I think a lot of guys find it pretty lonely out there when it comes to navigating the world, finding people that get it. They just get it. They just fall in line and don't. They're not drunk on the Kool-Aid, if I can put it that way. You know what I mean? There's a lot of plugged in beta males out there that think that just going along with the program to get along is the way to go. And I think at some point, most guys discover when chaos ensues that that doesn't work. Doesn't serve them in work, in creation of wealth, networking with women, any of those things. It just doesn't work. So tonight we're going to be talking about men and masculinity and tribes, gangs, whatever you want to call it. I've been an avid follower of Hollywood films that placate the narrative or the notion of gang type of activity, mob type of activity. In fact, while I was on the flight to and from Florida, I was listening to Michael Francesi or Francesi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name right, but he's interesting guy. I've watched some podcast interviews with him, and he put a book out called "I'll Make You an Offer You Can't Refuse," and he's kind of highlighting what it was like being in the Italian mafia ranks, code, why certain things were written, why other things weren't written, how and why guys would get whacked, all of this stuff. So to say that I have an interest in it is an understatement. Back in the day when I was a 20-something-year-old, and I talked about it in my book, The Unplugged Alpha. If you haven't read it, get it. It's on Amazon. There's a second revision coming out very soon. I'll talk about that in a bit. But I talk about in the book a chapter on why it's important for a guy to own a motorcycle. So I think I'll start there because childhood tribes that I've had were different. I mean, you can't call Boy Scouts a tribe. You know, it's just not. It's kind of the foundation. It's kind of the precursor, to males getting together, doing things that include activities with tasks at hand. Basic stuff, putting up a tent, collecting firewood, striking matches, getting a fire going, basic stuff, right? But I think I really observed it coming into its own when I got on a motorcycle. And I'll tell you why. Because as much fun as driving cars and exotic cars and doing these road trips that I often do that I've talked about is, there's a different kind of camaraderie that you get on a motorcycle. It's very difficult to explain, but it exists. And it's like taking a frying pan to the forehead. It's something that I still, to this day, look back fondly on. I haven't owned a motorcycle in a long time, a couple decades now. Whenever a friend of mine comes out and has one, he sees me looking at it, he goes, "Take it out for a rip." And I do. And it brings me back to my 20s. We spent all of that time in coffee shops into the wee hours of the night, talking, hanging out amongst other men on motorcycles, doing tasks. Not just sitting there talking and drinking coffee or anything like that, but actually going out and performing tasks, riding ramps. We would do all kinds of, can I say insidious things? Maybe the law didn't like what we were doing. Let's just put it that way. But we did them, and we did them as a group of men traveling in groups. Groups as small as 3 or 4, sometimes as large as 50, depending on what we were doing. And this is the first immersion that I got into the notion that the way of men is the way of the gang. The way of men is the way of the tribe. There's a book Jack Donovan wrote. I have it here on my desk. It's called The Way of Men. Summarizes it as the way of men is the way of the gang. It's a book about masculinity. It's a book about the tribal nature of men. It's a book about why men need to test each other and hold each other accountable and do things together. I think if you go back, if we could go back in a time machine, 100,000, 500,000 years, back to the hunter-gatherer times where you'd be out hunting and or gathering for sustenance. you weren't sitting across from each other talking. We didn't have screens and cameras and this sort of stuff. You'd be sitting shoulder to shoulder, probably stalking an animal, whispering in a low breath about the kill, lining up for it, maybe even, you know, what it was that you were going to do that night and who you were going to sleep with. Who knows? But the reality is that we've operated this way for eternity. We're definitely social. We definitely like the social aspect of life. I think women, for the most part, tend to be better at this, especially as guys get older. As guys get older, we suck at this stuff. We'll let friends go way of the wayside. We'll let women remove our tribes from us. If you're a guy that was into playing hockey, pickup hockey, or you know, ball teams, all kinds of stuff. You know, I see guys do this all the time, and oh, you don't have time for that anymore. We have a household to run. We have this to do. We have that to do. And guys will abandon their friendships and their tribes that they have, you know, to placate her whims and desires. The notion of betatization through 1,000 concession is inclusive in how men walk away from male tribes and masculinity. All right, let me get into these notes over here. So I talked about the notion of realizing the reality of tribes when I was a lot younger. Motorcycles was basically where it started off for me, man. It's just real. It's real. So let's talk about where you're not going to find good men that are good at being men. I think, again, I go back to Donovan's, you know, definition, because everything that I've seen out there, when people start diving down these rabbit holes and talking about masculinity and tribes and men and all that sort of stuff, most of them get it incredibly wrong. Okay. Come on, YouTube, cooperate. There we go. So you're not going to find these guys in places where you have no barrier to entry. If you don't have a barrier to entry, for example, pick up hockey. You have hockey equipment. Are you good on skates? Does somebody know you? Can they vouch for you? Have they seen you skate? You know, do they think that you have the capacity to be useful on the ice to the team, right? Like, you just can't show up at any kind of hockey arena with some equipment and say, hey guys, I'd like to come and play with you. Mind if I join in? Unlikely to happen. That's not how it works. You have to have well-organized, some sort of barrier to entry. Doesn't matter if it's some kind of firewall, paywall, whatever it happens to be, a test. And, you know, joining like a private Facebook group where it's like, why do you want to join this group? Da, 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 da. Do you have da, 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 right? You know, this is the standard basic shit. This is the basic bitch realm of most men's tribes out there, and they suck. Going into free groups. I'm a member of a lot of free groups on, I'm going to call them Facebook groups on social media, where councils of iron, strong men, men of masculinity, you name it, whatever name it is that they've slapped together words of iron, masculinity, and steel, and all that sort of stuff. Virtue, order, you know, whatever it happens to be. Most of them suck. Okay. I get a lot of my material from the stuff that the algorithms pick up and show me in my feed. I don't engage or comment on the stuff because it's like talking to somebody that doesn't want to hear a story. But what ends up happening is it sends the algorithms, which I find useful, send me anything that's trending. And it's always the same stuff. It's always some dorks that are like, my wife doesn't want to sleep with me. I've been changing the baby's diapers, cutting the grass. I just put the winter tires on her car for, and she won't even touch me. We haven't touched each other in 3, 4, 6 weeks. You get these nerds in the comments going, well, have you looked at her love language? What's her love language? Have you tried that yet? You know, like the standard, just garbage that doesn't work. This is why you get these types of results from these types of groups. They're plugged in beta males. They're basically build a better beta groups is what they are. Okay. These guys sleepwalk through life. They think that if you just pray, the right woman will come along. They think that if the right woman comes along, the unicorn, comes along, and they just do the right thing, right? We talked about this before. They tell men, you do what's right. They tell women, do what's right for you, girl. And these guys think if they just do the right thing, everything will be hunky-dory, tickety-boo, done. Everything's fine. Most of these groups are tribes of betas, building better betas. And while there might be some improvement and some growth in there, you're not going to get exactly, what you want in it. Yeah. Thanks, Moff, for clarification. We're talking about Jack Donovan, to be very clear. Moff, if you want to hop in as well, when you get a moment, I'll bring you in first so we can sort of talk a little bit about the weekend as well when I get to that. The other thing that you've got to recognize with groups of men, tribes, gangs, whatever it is that you want to call it, whatever it is we're going to call it on this cast, women talk, men do. If you're in a room, in a space where all it is just yap, 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 post, yap, 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 funny, mean, ha, 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 like emoji, da, 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 yap, 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 you're masturbating. That's all it is. I'm just going to be honest with you. You're not getting what a group of men need to put in and to get out of the environment from each other. Let's be very clear about that. Men do things. Women talk. That's why when women get together, let's go have dinner, girls. They put on their outfits, they do their hair and all that sort of stuff, and they sit around and they're talking. They're talking about Pecky from the HR department and what she's been doing. They talk about some part-timer that works in another business. They talk about husbands. They talk about boyfriends. They talk. They talk about celebrities. They talk. Okay. They don't generally do things. Men, on the other hand, it is as a prerequisite of a tribe to work, of a gang to be useful, does things. You can take the Italian mafia, the mob, as an example. They don't sit around and do nothing. They're very Machiavellian in the way that they operate. One of the things that kept coming up over and over again in Francese's book was the notion of Machiavelli versus Solomon, King Solomon. I've downloaded Machiavelli's audiobook. I think it's called The Prince. So I want to see what angles, are talked about in there. But the mob is very, very focused on doing shit. More or less the accumulation of influence, power, and more specifically wealth, right? They don't just sit around and talk about stupid shit. Who's banging who, Becky from HR, or any of that nonsense. They're doing something productive, right? And this is one of the things that I think a lot of guys miss when it comes to tribes and gangs and stuff like that, is they're not necessarily doing something productive. They're just spinning their wheels. Okay. They're just doing nothing. They're talking. Is there advancement? Are there things happening? Is there forward movement going on? In most of them, absolutely not. I can go into, I'm not going to do it. But do yourself a favor. You guys go in to one of these private Facebook groups and you'll see what I'm talking about. Many of you watching right now are probably watching from that angle too and understand exactly what I'm talking about. Let's talk about tribes within networks. So the Manoswamp is something that I think many of you are already familiar with, also known as the Manosphere. I call it the Manoswamp because of the type of men that are in the space, not good men, nor are they good at being men, but they have little categories of their own gangs and tribes within the Manoswamp. The pickup artists, these guys are primarily focused on getting girls, cold approaching women, getting their numbers, and generally speaking, getting a same night lay. They're just looking there to rack up notches. Pickup artists, that's their thing. Men's rights activists, same sort of group, right? These guys just focus on being activists for men's rights. Some of them are men, some of them are women, but they generally go around going, wah, it's not fair on men. And I completely agree with all the observations, but that's how the world sees it. They just go, wah, wah, wah. And they're not particularly effective. I've said this many times. For the type of activism that these gangs of men, the MRAs, are about, the way to make it work is only going to be if you get the gals together in the thousands, ideally tens or hundreds of thousands, marching on Capitol Hill to change laws that are hostile towards men, but they'll never do that. They'll just talk. They'll just talk, right? What else we got in that tribe? We got the MGTOW guys, the men going their own way. I have a chapter in my book about that. You should be very familiar with it if you've read my book. Again, if not, get your head around it, understand it. You got the TradCon crews, right? Also in the Manoswamp. These are the guys that are just like, wife her up. Put a ring on her, put some babies in her, and just wife her up and just hope for the best. They don't say hope for the best. They're basically like, you're not going to be a stat like those other guys, but that's essentially the strategy. Then you have all the different pills, black pill, purple pill, white pill. These are all collectives of guys getting together doing something. Now, as far as effectiveness and as far as results go, you're not going to see much in the way of movement, right? I've said this before. You can't really trust guys that are completely obsessed with getting tail, right? Just racking up notches, chasing women, right? And you also can't trust guys that can't get tail, because both of them will throw you under the bus. There's a weakness to both of them, right? The men that, I mean, if you go back to the mob, the Italian mafia, for example, like the Francese book, there's almost no talk in the entire book. Again, the book's title, I'll Make You an Offer You Can't Refuse. There's next to no talk about women in that book. It's about forming a brotherhood, accountability. It's about navigating slippery slopes. It's about making money. It's about dealing with obstacles. It's about holding each other accountable. But there's no talk in there about tail. The entire Manoswamp's about tail. So just marinate on that a little bit, right? Think about that for a second. I'm not saying go out and join the mafia or create your own mafia, but what I'm saying is the effectiveness and the depth in which these men go and the brotherhood that exists, the code of conduct, if you will, that exists. Again, you step out, you don't toe the line, you break a rule, you get whacked. You pay the ultimate price, right? They just kill you, right? They make that decision on you. So contemplate those things, right?